This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1010 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings. Thanks for tuning in. Football season's right around the corner. It's next week, and there's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count toward your quest for a share of $15 million. As you know, I'm drafting over there, and I've been documenting things with the Becoming a Best Ball Bro series. And that series is officially complete for Season 2. So you can listen to those episodes to help you out as well. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available from problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. It's a mailbag episode today. Let's get to these questions. The first question this week is from Noah on Patreon. It says, I know you're out on Travis Kelce, but do you think he can maintain some decent production when Rashee Rice is out, or even with Rice out, are you still out? So with Rashee Rice and that suspension, this is one of the better outcomes for anyone who is drafting Rice, in my opinion, because we're not having to wait. It's at the beginning of the season when you have healthy players and there aren't any bye weeks. And 6 games, that's a lot for sure, but it could have been worse. To me, 6 games was always kind of the median outcome here, especially after that report from a couple of weeks ago. Now, without Rice in the mix, that's obviously good news for Travis Kelce, but that doesn't mean that I'm now in on Kelce, because that's all going to be reflected in ADP. And I've known for weeks now that Rashee Rice was going to be suspended. The fact that this suspension is now at the front end of the season, that means that Kelce can get off to a hot start, sure. But I really worry about an old tight end during the fantasy football playoffs, during those weeks. Like, Rashee Rice should be back during the final stretch of the season. And last year when Rice was healthy, Kelce averaged 5 PPR points per game and a 14% target share. He was completely unusable. And I've said this time and time again, but pretty much every non-volume related peripheral for Travis Kelce last year took a hit. Yards per out run, yards after the catch per reception. He finishes the tight end 6 in PPR points per game because of volume. And when Rice is back, with Xavier Worthy now a second-year player, with Hollywood Brown potentially healthier, with Isaiah Pacheco back, I think it's fair to be concerned about what that target share is going to look like for Travis Kelce. I don't think that we can just pencil in a 25% share. So I'm still out on Kelce. I actually think there'd be more appeal for Kelce if we knew that this suspension was happening later in the season. But it's not. He might get off to an okay start, and maybe you're fine with that before moving on. I'm just not at his current cost. I'd rather just wait at the position. And I'm very nervous about what he's going to provide at the end of the year. And that's the most important part of the fantasy football calendar. This next question is from Nicholas on Patreon. It says, with the Adam Thielen trade, does this tell us the coaches are confident in Tetairoa McMillan and Jalen Coker, and are they getting bumped in the rankings due to this? So I'm not moving Tetairoa McMillan because he was already going to get his. I think this move of sending Adam Thielen to Minnesota tells us most about Jalen Coker and how they feel about Coker. And they should feel good about Coker. I wrote about this back in March when the late round prospect guide was released, because in that guide, I have year 2 profiles, and Coker is a year 2 player. Coker was better than Xavier Legette last year in yards per out run. A lot better. And the thing that was nice about his production was that even when Adam Thielen was active, because remember, he did miss some time last year, But even when Adam Thielen was active last year, Coker was still very good per route. Without Thielen, he had a yards per route run rate of 1.75. With him, it was 1.68. And when he played with Thielen, only 43% of his routes were coming out of the slot. It was just a really impressive season for an undrafted rookie. And that led to him having journey comparables, which are players who had similar ZAP scores and year 2 scores. They went on a similar journey as one another, but his journey comparables were Jacoby Myers, Allen Hurns, and Preston Williams. Myers and Hurns had pretty usable year 2 seasons. And I think Coker has a legitimate chance to be the number 2 option in this offense. Because Xavier Legette was not overly impressive last year. And he came into the league with a whole bunch of question marks. The Panthers are going to use McMillan and Legette on the outside and Jalen Coker in the slot. And don't sleep on Jatavian Sanders either. I think that he gets a little bit of a bump here too. It's a young offense, and they did lose a lot of experience with Thielen. But they're not going to make that move unless they feel really good about Jalen Coker, in my opinion. He's a huge winner of that trade, and he should be on everyone's late round radar. This next one's from Twitter. It's from @GilesG-Man. It says, who ends the fantasy season as the Texans' highest scoring running back? So my answer here is actually Woody Marks. Now, I think from a projection standpoint, it's probably Nick Chubb. But I don't think Dameon Pierce is a definite 0 in that backfield. And Pierce, he's more like Chubb than he is Woody Marks. They're both early down guys who don't have beefed up pass catching profiles. But Marks does. Marks is good in pass pro, and he does have a good pass catching profile. At least in the ZAP model. Now, some of that has to do with him playing with the late Mike Leach, but he was still good on that front when he transferred to USC. He was still a pass catcher. He had a 14% reception share last year. Now, the downside to Marks' analytical profile as a prospect is that he was a little bit older. He's past his 24th birthday, and his speed score was below average. I don't think that he's some exceptional athlete. But we know that we should be focused on pass catching at running back throughout the draft. That should be our main focus. And I actually feel good about Marks as the pass catcher, given the alternatives that they have in that offense. Chubb and Pierce may ebb and flow, with Chubb getting more of the priority, but Marks has a shot to give you a baseline at receiving, and maybe he just surprises and he's better between the tackles than we initially thought, that we expect. So he feels like the target in that backfield. But I do think that Nick Chubb is more of the if you need points right away selection. This next question is from Patreon. It's from Paul. It says, Travis Etienne is 1 year removed from being RB3. Is a top 10 running back finish still in his range of outcomes given the retooled and redesigned offense? So I see this talked about Etienne quite a bit, but I think we need to put this 2023 season into some context. That year, he played all 17 games. That's going to help any running back look good in overall standings. He was technically the RB7 in PPR points per game, not the RB3. Now, I know that's just semantics. Some people are going to roll their eyes at that, but I think it's important to put it in per game context. But that's not really the focus here. In 2023, Etienne scored 12 times. According to PFF's expected touchdowns formula, he outperformed expectation by 4 touchdowns. And he wasn't very good per rush. That's the biggest problem in my eyes. He saw the highest running back rush share of his career. That led to 267 carries. But he had a horrible rate of gaining positive yardage. And that showed up in success rate. He had just a 34.5% success rate that year. That ranked 36 of 44 qualified running backs according to Next Gen Stats. And that season, he had a 10-plus yard run rate of just 8.2%. We had 23 running backs get to 200 or more carries that year. Only 4 of those running backs were worse at gaining 10 or more yards. I just don't think that Etienne has been undeniably good. That's my problem with him. I do have him ranked highest among the Jags running backs, largely because I think that he's going to be used early on, and he has more pass catching upside than Tank Bigsby. I haven't faded him by any means. I'm just noting that I think there's a good bit of fragility with him and this profile. To me, the target in this backfield all summer and to this day has been Bashal Tutin. I want to go with the upside play. I want to go with the player who I loved as a prospect, who I think has every down potential, and he's a big play waiting to happen. And this could be a really good offense with Liam Cohen. Etienne just hasn't been good enough. Tank Bigsby, he lacks pass catching upside. Now, Tutin may end up being a 0, but I'm leaning into my evaluation for a double-digit round pick. If it doesn't work out, it won't sink my fantasy team. This next question is from Blue Sky. It's from @indefr. It says, hey JJ, any advice on things to keep an eye on for post-draft and going into the first few weeks of the fantasy season? Usage. People are going to be enamored with actual points scored early on in the season. They want to get the next big thing based on that production. But if there's not good usage attached to that production, you shouldn't be as aggressive in getting that player. But also on top of that, we have to remember that we don't have many answers with who's good and who isn't early on. If a player goes absolutely nuts in week 1 or week 2, and maybe the usage is just average but not excellent, there's a chance he's just facing a team that's going to be really bad against that position this year. But look, the 15 transactions episode, the 10 trends episode, those episodes are there each week to really help us understand usage. Volume is the foundation of fantasy football. Wacky things can happen in the points scored column. But what's more predictive is if that final output is stemming from good usage overall. Don't only look at the production, watch the peripherals. This next question is from Twitter. It's from @AdamMakesBeer. It says, I've seen a lot of people talking about Goff regressing and viewing him as a fade. In the next breath, they will say that the Lions are bound to be in more negative game scripts, that they will be throwing the ball down the field more and throwing more in general. Arrow up on Jared Goff? So I don't think the negative game script thing is necessarily true given how banged up that defense was to end last season. They may not win as many games, but they really had to keep pace and be efficient through the air to work things last year, to be good as a team. Now, with that being said, I do think the Lions, they're going to throw more this year. I mean, you can just look at recent history for them and see that's probably going to be the case. They were 27th in pass rate last year when their 2 previous seasons ranked 19th. They had 551 pass attempts as a team when they were 30 to 50 pass attempts higher in their 2 previous seasons. But think of it this way. Jared Goff was a better fantasy asset last year versus those 2 other seasons, versus 2022 and 2023. Ask yourself, why is that the case? Well, it's because volume isn't as important at quarterback in fantasy football as it is running back and wide receiver and tight end. We need touchdowns. And Goff, he had a touchdown rate last year that was significantly higher than any other rate of his career. And you heard me talk about Baker Mayfield earlier this week, hopefully on that bold predictions episode, and how quarterbacks within that 6.7% and 7.7% touchdown rate, they've all seen a dip in year-over-year production in points per game since 2011. Jared Goff is part of that group. I would be very surprised if Jared Goff has a better 2025 season than 2024 season. And look, I know that this is counterintuitive, but all of these things can be true. The Lions can throw more while Jared Goff sees regression and he's not as good of a fantasy asset. I think he's a candidate to match ADP, but when I'm drafting in the later rounds, I'm not going to force it with a profile like this when there are so many good pocket passers to choose from this year. To me, he's no different than a Jordan Love or a Justin Herbert or even a CJ Stroud or Trevor Lawrence. In fact, when it comes to upside, you could argue the other guys more than Jared Goff. With quarterback, because we're taking them late and because they're more replaceable, we need to chase ceiling even more. And I don't think Jared Goff has that type of ceiling. You can draft him in super flex leagues, but in single quarterback leagues where he generally goes, I'm not really getting Jared Goff. The last question this week is from Patreon. It's from Matt. It says, hey JJ, I often hear you say that you would reach for a running back if your league mates were on a run of drafting running backs. However, I always thought it was better to zig when others are zagging and get the value at the falling wide receiver in that scenario. Why is it better to follow in the steps of your league mates rather than be different and try to get the best player available? Thanks. So if I say that often, I apologize, because I don't mean that you should reach for a position when your league has a positional run. What you might be referencing is how I talk about reacting to your draft, which is essentially you go into your draft, you have some idea of how things are going to go down, but you have to switch that up based on how your league mates are drafting. And I actually got a few questions about this idea this week, so let's just dig into it. You may go into your draft with a particular ranking sheet, hopefully it's mine, and most drafts will generally go in a similar way. you won't see like wildly different evaluations of players from one draft to another. But sometimes you do. And in those instances, you need to react to how your draft is doing things. This is most obvious in Superflex leagues. Now, I've been publishing Superflex rankings this summer, but I think this year, more than any other in recent memory, Superflex rankings, they're mostly irrelevant. Genuinely. I think I'm actually doing more harm for people than good by putting together Superflex rankings. Because I'll value quarterbacks a certain way for those rankings. But you could very easily get into a draft this year where quarterbacks are getting drafted over and over and over again in the first few rounds. You could also be in one where the big four drop off the board, and then there's Joe Burrow, and there's just not much movement at the position. You need to react to how those drafts are going. In the first instance, where people are drafting quarterbacks early and often, you have to recognize that quarterback is eventually going to run out. There's only so much supply. Like you can and you probably should draft running backs and wide receivers in the first couple of rounds, as opposed to taking a player like Jared Goff at the 2-3 turn. But you also have to recognize that quarterback isn't infinite. The position does eventually dry up. So if you're not reactive to what's going on, you're going to walk away from your Superflex draft with Daniel Jones and Joe Flacco as your starters. Meanwhile, if the vibe of the draft is that people are waiting longer than expected to draft that quarterback, you don't want to force the issue. Because let's say that you have this giant tier from Patrick Mahomes all the way to like Justin Herbert, who's at like, I don't know, QB 16. This is just an example. But let's say that Patrick Mahomes goes in round 2. You want to be drafting quarterback at the end of that tier to extract as much value as possible. You might be able to get Justin Herbert in round 5. And you see Herbert and Mahomes as relatively interchangeable. That's why they're in the same tier. And again, this is just an example. It's just a hypothetical. But if Justin Herbert, if you get him in round 5, that makes the team who took Mahomes look a whole lot worse. Because they got Mahomes all the way back in round 2. And you see Herbert and Mahomes as interchangeable. If you're not reacting to what's going on in your draft, where drop-offs occur at positions and how the flow of the draft is going, then you're not extracting as much value as you could possibly extract. Reacting to your draft essentially has to do with tiers and knowing what you can get later. If what you can get later has shifted because of how your draft is going down, then you have to react and you may need to force the issue a little bit and draft a player above where he's ranked. This to me is what differentiates a good drafter from a mediocre or bad drafter. Anyone can look at a rankings list and just draft off of that list. But if you don't have a holistic understanding of where these pockets of value might be, then you're not going to be walking away with the most valuable team or roster. If you know that you can get a comparable wide receiver a round later, then you don't have to force it with wide receiver in the current round. You may rather get another position, even if that player at that other position is ranked below the wide receiver. And a lot of that, if not all of it, is dictated by how your league is drafting. Sometimes you do need to reach. Sometimes you should reach. It's not comfortable, but it's a necessary thing to do. So that's combining both things, reaching and reacting. I'll never say to simply reach when there's a positional run. All that does in a vacuum is devalue the player that you're drafting, that you're reaching for. However, if you know that that position is about to dry up, that it's about to hit a huge wall, and there's a big tier break, then you do have to reach in those instances. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening this week, everyone. Greatly appreciate it. Enjoy your holiday weekend. And next week, football season and that football season schedule, it officially begins. I'll talk to you then.